really being true to yourself and doing what you really are wanting to do and feel like you're good at. If you're leaving work every day and you're exhausted and you're stressed and you don't want to go back to work, that's a problem.
This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. This is session number 40 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you found us and so glad you're listening to the podcast. It's hard to believe that I'm already up to 40 episodes or 40 sessions of the podcast. It's just really been mind-boggling to me to see the growth and just the number of people that are following now and listening to the podcast. I looked at my statistics from Libsyn, which is the hosting I use for the podcast, and had over 6,000 downloads so far of the podcast. And I know that for some that doesn't seem like a lot, but for me it's huge. And I'm just so thankful to all the folks that listen to the podcast and are out there and following the practice of therapy. And I very much appreciate your comments and sending me emails and notes and just letting me know that it's valuable to you. And I hope that it is. That's the whole reason that I do it, is to make sure that people get information and resources and helping them in their journey into private practice and just learning this whole realm of being clinicians. And so glad you're here. So, as I'm recording this, we're in the full swing of summer. It's almost the middle of June, and it is summertime, and I love it. This past weekend, I had my brother and sister-in-law and their two kids were here with us for the weekend, and got to go see my niece and nephew compete in a swim meet that was held here in town, and it was just fun time, and so just love being able to do those things. Next week, I'm going to be at a camp called Grace Point, and it's a summer youth camp, and it's run by the Diocese of East Tennessee, the Episcopal Church, which I'm part of. I think I've mentioned to folks before, one of the other hats that I wear is I'm an Episcopal clergy person, and so looking forward to being with those kids and just learning from them and hopefully being able to teach them some things as well. And the other thing that's exciting about next week is that my daughter is going to be helping me with the program, and she's going to be, I really kind of let her take the lead, and I'm just going to be her helper along the way with that program. But we're going to be talking with those kids about fear and how to deal with fear, and just kind of hopefully helping them learn some things along the way. It's just a great experience being able to do that. I know even for me as a kid, going to those summer camps were very formative for me. So anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention to folks is that one of the things that I've noticed is that the number one resource that most people tend to download or get from me at the Practice of Therapy is this thing I put together called the Session Note Helper. And what that is a tool that you can create for yourself using Google Forms and Google Docs. And those of you that have listened to me for a while know that I'm a big fan of Google G Suite and put a course together just around how to use that for your practice. But the Session Note Helper was something that I developed really out of my own frustration about having to do documentation and spending a lot of time doing documentation. And so what the Session Note Helper does is you use the Google form, and I've put together some templates for that, that just you go down and fill out you just click off some check boxes, and you go through the form and fill it out for your individual session. And then it produces a narrative based on what you check off. And so it just saves so much time in typing. And then once it produces the Google Doc that is the narrative form, you can also go back in there and edit that before you save the note. And you can either copy and paste from the note into your electronic health record system, or you can just save the doc on its own in Google Drive. And if you're using the paid version of Google Drive, it is HIPAA secure. So anyway, go check that out. You can just go to the URL sessionnotehelper.com and see that and learn a little more about that. So just wanted to make folks aware of that resource if you haven't run across it already. So today I've got my guest, Dayna Sykes, and Dayna and I have a bit of a history together, and that we both worked for the same agency about the same time. And she and I had kind of parallel paths there, and that we both were started out as therapists with the organization, and then quickly moved up to become supervisors, and then later clinical consultants within the organization. And the organization we worked with we mainly worked with at-risk children and youth. But Dayna is going to be talking about her private practice journey and how she made the transition from working for an agency into private practice. So without further ado, here is Dayna Sykes. Well, welcome again, folks, to the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so happy to have my guest today, Dayna Sykes. And Dayna and I knew each other from way back when. Dayna, it's hard to believe the amount of time that has gone by, but Dayna and I worked for the same agency, and she worked it was a larger agency, so we covered the whole state that we're in, Tennessee. And so Dayna worked in a different part of the state, but we had a lot of interaction along the way, just being supervisors and consultants and all that sort of thing. So welcome, Dayna.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So tell folks about a little bit about yourself, and just how you've a little bit about your private practice journey and how you've landed where you are.
Okay. Well, I think my story is probably a little interesting because I wasn't really planning for a long time to go into private practice. That's always been my long-term goal, even when I was in agency work. But I actually left my job during maternity leave. Left the agency I was working for while I was on maternity leave. And during that time, my husband and I were just talking. I was finishing up my licensure, and we said, let's just go for it. Let's do this. Let's see how it goes, because I just could not imagine working 40 plus hours a week with my brand new baby girl. Uh-huh. So I really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And so as I was building, starting off fresh, I was able to really focus on being a mom while I was kind of getting it going. So I was home for a little while with her before I started this journey. Uh-huh. But when I did start, I found another therapist in the area, and just went and met with him and said, hey, I'm really interested in opening a practice here in our small town. I'm from Smith County, Tennessee, which is a very small area, and my practice is in Gordonsville. And we've just really started getting some a good business area booming there. And so I really wanted to work in my hometown. So there was another therapist here at the time, and he and I met, and he opened his office to me for the first couple of years of my practice. So that helped me a lot to get on my feet. And not have all that overhead cost. I just had a small overhead to cover my rent with him. And that was really nice to get me started. So,
and I think that's what I was going to say is I think that is a very good and typical way for people to start a practice, is not to, in the beginning stages, don't stress out about having your own office space somewhere.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of, I think exactly like you did, and I did the same thing, just looked around and found somebody else that was already established and said, okay, let me kind of piggyback on what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think too,
Mm-hmm.
as people, well, and I'm quite a perfectionist myself, but we want that big
Mm-hmm.
picture right away. And so people really get in debt trying to set their practice up immediately the way they want it. And I have just worked my way into it. This is going on 7 years now that I've been doing this. And each year I'm learning more and more about where I want to be and finally understanding where my niche is. And just learning how to manage everything, because I think going into it, you don't realize when it's just you, there's quite a bit of stuff to manage there. And I do everything myself. I'm solo. There's nobody in the office with me right now. I don't even have a secretary right now.
Wow.
I do everything on my own, pretty much, except for my website. I finally did reach out and get somebody else to help me with that area, because I am not good at the technology stuff. So,
yeah. So, sounds very similar to kind of what I did. Of course, I didn't go on maternity leave, but, yeah. So, you've been in private practice now for 7 years, and I guess the learning curve has been huge.
It has been, yes. And, going into it, I didn't know what I was doing, because there's a lot behind the scenes of, when you're building a business. And if you've never owned a business, you have no idea really what you're getting into unless you have somebody to kind of walk you through it. And I really didn't have that. I figured out everything kind of on my own. The therapist that I befriended, we're good friends now. We talk frequently. We're not in the same office anymore because I have a brand new office that I opened up 2 years ago. So another goal that I reached. But it's a lot just behind the scenes work and getting that MPI number and getting set up with insurances if you bill insurance, or getting off of insurance. I've been doing that the past year. So
wow. Okay.
A lot of nuts and bolts to it, of course. And if you don't have someone to kind of hold your hand and walk you through it that's done it, it can take a lot of energy out of you, for sure.
Right. So so maybe tell us a little bit about that process, about deciding to be on insurance and then maybe getting off some insurance panels.
Yeah, well, when I started the practice, of course, I wasn't on any network panels yet. I was in the process of getting on network panels. And so I even started my cost pretty low because I thought, I'm in a small town. I can't charge a lot of money to people, and so I started out, I think I'll just call myself, that was the baby stage, I was a newborn infant during that time. And so I was, spending a lot of time filling out paperwork, trying to get on every insurance panel I could. Even on TennCare, I took some TennCare for a while. And then I started, I did that for the first several years. And it became a huge stressor to me because I wasn't feeling like I was getting paid what I was worth. And I was having a really hard time making ends meet and feeling like I was turning a profit, because once I got this new office a couple years ago, I actually had a pretty big overhead to take care of. And so when you're working a lot and you're doing something stressful, working with clients that are, have chaotic lifestyles or going through crisis, and you're spending a lot of time in that process, and then documentation, that to me that's something that has always overwhelmed me.
Yes.
Insurance is a lot of work, doing all the billing and keeping up with it, and whenever you don't get paid, having to appeal things or having to contact insurance. I just finally decided, after I love there's a couple of therapists that I have found out there who have been, I feel like they're like my heroes. I've listened to their podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I really have been encouraged by them and have learned a lot from them. And so, by listening to them, I've been learning, hey, get paid what you're worth, do what you want to do, get paid for the thing that you love to do. Don't just accept everybody that calls you, be selective
Uh-huh.
and find your perfect fit, and so that's something
Mm-hmm.
I've really learned. And so I finally took the leap last year and started working on getting off of these other insurance panels. I take one insurance right now, and everything
Mm-hmm.
else is private pay. And
Right.
the stress load has gone down tremendously after I did
Wow.
that. So,
Yeah. So I think one thing that people are worried about when they do that, when they start divesting from insurance companies, that they'll lose those potential clients. But it sounds like, because of your niche and because what you really focus on, that wasn't the case. Is that true?
well,
Okay.
I did lose a couple clients, not many though. A lot of them, I prepped them along the way, and let
Mm-hmm.
them know way in advance before I had even sent my termination letters that, hey, I'm going to be coming off of your insurance panel. I want you to be aware of this. I want to give you plenty of time to either, work to a point where you can pay out of pocket, or I can, make a referral and feel comfortable with that referral process. Um,
Right.
so several of them said, we're going to stay with you. We've been coming here. This is where we want to be. You're the one I want to see, which was
Mm-hmm.
a great feeling. The majority of the ones that I lost were TennCare,
Okay.
which
Yeah, and for folks listening to this, when she refers to TennCare, that in Tennessee, that's our Medicaid
yes,
um, name for Medicaid in Tennessee.
yeah. So a lot of
Mhm.
a lot of lower incomes there. So I knew they wouldn't be able to pay out of pocket. But I did. I feel like I closed out those cases pretty well, and a couple of people I kind of hung on to pro bono just to finish up the process with them, because
Right,
I didn't want to leave them feeling like I'd abandoned them or anything. So,
right,
but I
right.
did. I made sure and gave them, while I was in that thinking process, I went ahead and started communicating it to my clients and letting them know. And, most people, when I explain to them, if they question me about it, one of the things I would say is, you know, working with insurance is really a lot of work, and it's very time consuming for me. And I'm solo. I work here by
Mm-hmm,
myself, and they all know that. I don't have anyone,
mm-hmm,
doing administrative stuff for me. Don't have anyone answering my phones. I like to be the one to answer the phone. And so
uh-huh.
they all, pretty much understood. And then there were times where I would say, have you ever had to call your insurance for anything? And they would say, yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And I'd say, okay, well, that's how it is for me too. I
Uh-huh.
get that same feeling. So,
Yeah.
just they've worked with me pretty well, which was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good, good. So, tell us a little bit more about your niche. I know that before we started recording the podcast, I know that was one of the things that we kind of talked about is, being able to, one of the advantages of going into private practice is that you can really focus in on the kinds of clients that number one, that that you work with best,
Yes.
and number two, that just the people that you want to work with.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is kind of a funny story too, because when I started my practice, I remember saying, I'm going to work with adults because I've been working with, young people and their families for so many years, because that's what I did in my agency work, was family counseling, a lot of crisis counseling with 18 and under. So I
Right.
felt like I wanted to get out of that. And so I started working with adults at first. And it just wasn't making me feel, I guess, I wasn't coming home full of energy from those sessions. It wasn't resonating with me very well. And so, in grad school, I was always interested in play therapy. And so I started kind of getting into that avenue and working with kids, getting a lot of training in that, and working with children. And I love that. And that led to a lot of phone calls for older children and adolescents. And so I started using a lot of techniques I was learning in play therapy with the older child population I was working with teenagers and younger adolescents, and was really feeling like I was getting a lot of success with that. And utilizing the skills I had, doing family therapy, I try to incorporate that system. And I've really just fell in love with working with teenagers again. And, like you said, we can kind of do things our way when we're in private practice. And I think, being able to really nail down the types of families I want to work with and the types of issues I want to work with. Most of the teenagers I see struggle with anxiety and depression. And they have parents who are really interested in doing whatever they can to help them. And having those types of families who are willing to come in and they're willing to go home and do the homework, and they're willing to support their teenagers in ways that I suggest and encourage them, it makes a tremendous difference from what I felt like I used to be doing. And I really enjoy working with them. I love just being able to connect with young people. I feel like that's something I've always done very well with. And it doesn't hurt that they all think I'm younger than I am either. That makes it feel even better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just I love working with teenagers, and I feel like that population is underserved in a way. I know there are lots of therapists out there that work with teenagers, but I feel like a lot of them use talk therapy, and clients that I've seen have had therapy in the past a lot of times. And that's kind of, they felt like it wasn't very effective. And, a lot of the concerns I hear are that, they just would talk. They didn't really want to talk to people. And so I use a lot of other means. I do a lot of sand tray therapy. I use a lot of art therapy. And then I use some aspects of play therapy so that, it's very interactive and they feel pretty comfortable. And, I get down on the floor and take my shoes off with them, and, we just kind of hang out and do therapy.
Yeah. And that's, I was just sitting here thinking about, back when you both and I, you and I both worked at the same agency. And one of the typical clients that we had there were, we were seeing them not out of their own choice. They were, either court ordered to go to therapy, or the crisis had reached to such a level that they didn't, the child or the family was at risk of losing the kid to state's custody and all of that sort of thing. And it's just, that in and of itself was less stressful. I think, I'm so glad we've got people that really enjoy that kind of work. And I hope there will always be a lot of people that will go into that. But I think one of the things that I mentioned in a previous podcast, actually it was the podcast, the one that I did with Jane Carter here recently, where we talked about finding your superpowers. And I think that's so important to be able to find the type of therapy, the type of client, and that sort of thing that really speaks to you personally and that you're passionate about. And in the long run, you end up doing much better therapy clinically when you're working with that the people that you really want to work
with. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I remember days when, and, sometimes I still have this because some days are still stressful. When you have a client come in that's suicidal or maybe more than one, it seems like sometimes that happens in waves. That can be a really stressful day, but you shouldn't feel that stress every day. And, I've been reading a book called Profit First. And, one of the things he talks about is your business becoming a monster that's controlling you? And I think private practice can become that really easily if you're not really being true to yourself and doing what you really are wanting to do and feel like you're good at. If you're leaving work every day and you're exhausted and you're stressed and you don't want to go back to work, that's a problem. Private practice was my dream job, and I'm doing it right now. I'm doing my dream job right now. And, the longer I'm doing it, the better I'm getting at making it my dream. And, I look forward to going in every day and seeing my clients and feeling like I'm making a difference in their lives. And, it's a wonderful feeling as opposed to how I've felt before.
Right. Yeah. And I can say, I would just say ditto to that. It was when I first went into private practice, and especially when I made that shift from the agency work, to be able to wake up in the morning and say, wow, I'm really looking forwad to going into the office. And I'm really looking forward to this.
It's kind of an odd feeling,
as opposed to the opposite. Yeah, it is. As opposed to the opposite, where you just kind of dread the drive in and just dread getting there. And you live for the weekend and that sort of thing.
Can't stop thinking about it and go to sleep even, I mean, it's a truly different feeling, and it's a wonderful feeling. And, I believe, God has blessed us all with wonderful talents. And if we can just tap into those, and I feel like a lot of things that have happened in my life, God has just really put that plan out there. And as long as I'm following it, I have felt like I've really been able to be more successful in that way, just do what he's given me that gift to do, and don't try to change it like I did in the beginning,
I know one of the other things that you and I have spoken about just through email is just doing things to help us stay more productive and more organized. And I know one of the things that you and I had shared with you that I've started using Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner. But, the thing that strikes me for you, Dayna, is that since you are a solo practice and you're doing all of it yourself, what have you found that helps you get it all done?
Oh, goodness. I feel like that's kind of a loaded question because I don't get it all done. That's for sure. I have things I get behind. I'm someone who I think I can get everything done in a short amount of time. And I end up having to forward things over to the next day and the next day. But, I think the thing I've been learning, especially these last 2 years, is systems, having systems. I have a system in the morning. I have a system before I leave the office, and just having that routine, making it a habit. Those things are probably the most helpful. Definitely getting rid of distractions. I check my email at certain times of the day. I don't check it all day long in between everything I do, because that just sucks the life right out of your day. I try to stay off of social media because that's another one of those time-sucking distractions. So, but yeah, I'm a list maker. I like to make lists, and I write everything down and just prioritize it. And if things don't get done, they get pushed off to another day. But I try to get the most important things done before I leave. And I'm actually only in my office 2 days a week. And I actually just had a conversation with my husband this morning about, I've really, especially now that it's summer and my kids are home, because it's going to be even harder on those days that I'm off to make myself do any work. But I've got to make an administrative day because my days have gotten so busy when I'm in the office and I'm seeing clients all day long. I'm got to create myself an administrative day. But I find too, if I can schedule it with myself and stick to that schedule, I can be pretty productive.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm learning about too is as people have heard me say on the podcast several times, I'm not a naturally organized person. I have to put a lot of energy and effort into staying on top of that. But one of the things that I've figured out, and you're right, I think getting into some rituals and routines with how we do things. I've one thing that I try to stick to are theme days. In other words, like Wednesdays are my documentation day, and so that's the day that I've got kind of devoted to getting caught up with documentation and that sort of thing. Mondays and Fridays are usually I'm doing the podcast and working on practice of therapy things, and then the other days of the week I'm working on my actual practice, Kingsport Counseling Associates. So, So I think that's a one thing that's real important is are finding ways to keep yourself on track, because as you've experienced and I experienced, the busier you get, just the busier you get. And it's, and so you've got to really have some systems in place.
And, I've learned a lot. One of the best websites I found just by accident was one that Melissa does for QA prep. Melissa Hall. I love her stuff. And I have learned so much about documentation from her because, at the agency we worked for, we had to do things a certain way. And we had to document everything because we worked with a lot of Medicaid clients and, or which we call TenCare. They had a lot of requirements as how we documented everything. And so going into my own, private practice, in grad school, one of the things they said was to be really cautious about how you document things. You don't want to put everything in there. You just want to put what's important in there to show progress. And I really struggled with that transition for a long time. And sometimes I still do. But I happened upon her website one day, and she has been a tremendous resource for me in learning how to really keep up with my documentation and not spend so much time trying to document everything. That's been really helpful.
Yeah. And Melissa's been a guest on this podcast twice.
Yes, I've listened to those.
Melissa's a good, and so I'll put in the show notes just more information about that as well, just how to get in, because that really is Melissa's expertise, is being able to help people with their documentation and stay on top of it.
She's really good at what she's doing. And it's great. There are a lot of therapists out there who do, similar jobs that she's doing, and, really just being a resource out there for people going into private practice. You're one of those, just being able to have people who can give you those resources so that you're not trying to create everything, from scratch, and, doing everything legally and ethically. And it's great to have people who've been in this position long enough that they can really, kind of mentor us.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I know I have benefited a lot from is just that whole mentoring piece and coaching piece, getting some individual consulting with Joe Sanok was a big help to me. And then also being part of a mastermind group, which again, people have heard me on the podcast talk about the mastermind groups I'm trying to get going here. So, but again, I'll put some more information about that in the show notes or whatever. So, but Dayna, so I'm aware of our time, and I know your time's important. If you were to give some top 2, top 3 tips to people that are thinking about private practice or are in private practice, what would those be?
Well, number 1, I would say stay true to yourself and do what you love. Don't try to fit in the box that people try to put you in. And another one is make connections. Don't isolate yourself. I think private practice can be very isolating, and especially if you're in an office all by yourself like I am, and I'm in a rural area where I'm the only practitioner there. So make connections, network with people, get to know other therapists, because they truly have your back. Everyone I've connected with, whether I've just met them or have known them for a short amount of time, they have always been so supportive and helpful in anything I've ever, needed assistance with. And I think that kind of goes full circle. I try to reach out. I've had someone call me recently who's interested in going into private practice. And, my first thing is, yes, I will absolutely, support you in any way that I can. Because I know how that feels. Starting out, it's scary. And so just really make some connections and reach out to people. Don't be afraid to do that.
And I would, to piggyback on that, I would say one of the things that I think is a big myth is this whole idea of other therapists being your competition. And I think that is just a myth we need to dispel with, because believe me, there's more than enough people hurting people and people that need our services out there to where we don't have to compete with each other, but it's always better to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, and that's, I know I've got another therapist here locally, and I've had Sybil Smith on the podcast as well. And Sybil and I get together fairly regularly just for coffee, just to talk about our practices. And we have very similar practices, and both of us are, group practices. And so she's been a big help to me, and just having that support, because you're right, it can get very isolating very quickly.
Yeah, it can. And I have a group of therapists. We just added a person I recently met, which they're all in Lebanon, which is about a 20-minute drive from me. But one of the people in the group is the one I shared an office with. And so, we try to get together once a month and just, we can talk about any struggles we're having, or sometimes we just need to, talk, sit down with coffee and talk. And so that is such a refreshing meeting, and it just kind of revives us just to be able to get together with like-minded people and be able to talk about, what's going on in our lives or in our practice.
That you're so right. Well, Dayna, if folks want to get in touch with you or find out more about you, where can they go?
You can reach me at daynasykes.lpc.com. That's my website. I have resources on there. I have information about my practice on there. And I would love to have people follow me there.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks again, Dayna, and it's so great to reconnect, and maybe we'll get you back on here again, and hopefully we can maybe at some of the different conferences and stuff we can connect again there as well. So thanks for being on the podcast today. One of the things that I have enjoyed the most about doing this podcast is just being able to make those connections and being able to hear other people's stories and how they've ended up where they've ended up in their private practices and how they got there. And so I'm so glad that Dayna and I were able to connect again, and I was able to have her on the podcast. She is just a great person to get to know, and it's always affirming as well to when I hear people's stories and hear the similarities that you're really not alone in this. And as Dayna mentioned, just being able to reach out to others that are in this same journey that are in private practice and just learning from them. And it is one of the best ways to keep yourself sane, if you will, with all that it takes to go in being in private practice. And as I mentioned earlier too, do check out the mastermind groups that I'm trying to get started. You can go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode of this program, check out the Session Note Helper. I think that might be a great tool for you. And it fits with what we talked about in the podcast around being able to stay organized and being able to automate processes that just help you become more efficient in what you do. Because in this job, there is so much that we're required to do and so many demands on us. And I think the more that we can do to become better organized and more efficient and more productive in what we do, it just makes it so much easier. So you can check out the Session Note Helper over at sessionnotehelper.com. So just got that URL available for you. Well, thanks again, folks, for joining us. And do go over and subscribe wherever you might be listening to the podcast. And join us in the next week as we continue on this journey. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.